Suzanne, what are some of to you, kind of the more interesting things that you think are going to make it to the court in this time in terms of litigation? I mean, you just said like things are going to, oh my gosh, so many things are going to go to the court. I'm like what? Like what interests you? What things do you think are going to?
Yeah. Well, so I'll just take a step back and just again say my role is usually to put out disputes. So when I say the courts are flooded, you couldn't even file for a while. I think that was just lifted in New York today. My colleague told me California there's e-filing, but whether or not you could submit motions was another story. All hearings have been pushed back. So it really pushes people to try to settle. And I
Mm-hmm.
try to, I have a video on legal issues, when it comes to whether you have a lawsuit. And I'm always telling my clients, look at your claims, look at your corroboration. Do you have evidence? Can you continue to communicate with the other party to try to resolve this? Look for a compromise. And, what's your compensability? What are your damages? How much money is at stake? And so I
Is
put
it
that.
worth it? Yeah.
It's worth it, yeah. At the end of the day, it may not be because you could have resolved this sooner and moved on to greener pastures. Sometimes it is because you may have a good case. You may have a lawyer who thinks you have a good case. I have definitely heard about um, events, concerts, sporting events, not giving proper refunds. The class action lawyers are all over that. Price gouging issues.
Crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could get fines from the city for that, increasing the price of hand sanitizer, anything more than 10%. You're not allowed to do that during times of a pandemic or an emergency. I've seen, well,
It's like you're
obviously,
not allowed to do it, but like who's going to stop you? You just said it. Like the courts aren't even taking like these guys are so overwhelmed. People are going to get away with stuff.
well, there's the court system to resolve civil issues, and then you have the government that goes after, that's in charge of overseeing some of these rules. So they will issue
I
fines.
see.
They may, yeah. So
The
uh,
feds.
the feds, yes, exactly. You may get a fine. The Department of Consumer Affairs is looking out for the price gouging issue. Um, and people, but I deal with mostly contracts. So when a contract is breached right now, it's a lot of back and forth between the other party's lawyer and trying to work out a settlement.
Negotiating. Yeah.
Negotiating, yes, trying to get a settlement, whether it's coronavirus related or not. It's something you do. I mean, because maybe businesses right now, they're moving on to other things. They have to change things around, and so they don't either want to pay or they don't want to provide the service. So I'm dealing with contract issues on whether or not people can get out of them or helping my clients with that.
Suzanne, you and I spoke a little bit before. Tell me about some of the businesses that you work with. You said restaurants, gyms. These guys have rent they have to pay. What are their options now? What are they doing? What tell me about your experience with them in this time because they don't have any money coming
Right. Well, I also told clients to try to get the SBA loans, that the disaster relief and the SBA CARES Act provided the PPP loan. So I was trying to help my clients with some of that. And then if that money, even if that money came in, some of it was supposed to go to payroll versus paying rent. So with the landlord situation in LA, because a lot of my clients in LA, and I've been specifically retained to work on this for several clients, but Garcetti issued an order, which is now an ordinance that says that basically you have 3 months from after the end of the state of emergency to pay your rent to the landlord. It does not mean that you don't have to pay it. It just means that if you're supposed to pay $5,000 a month and this goes on for, let's say, 5 months, then you're going to have to pay $25,000 before the end of when this is the ordinance ends. So whether or not you choose to take that aggressive stance with your landlord is on, one issue to consider. Another is whether or not you have the financial capability of actually paying rent. So Garcetti, in the order, it says that if this has to be because you don't have the financial means. This can't be for a business that has a ton of money in the bank, because you're going to have to show the financials to your landlord.
in? Yeah.
So you may want to work with the landlord, and I'm dealing with this right now. We're going back and forth with, the landlord is pushing for all of, the landlord's being aggressive, and we're being, responsive to that, being aggressive, or they just agree. I've had some clients where they don't even have to. The landlord has actually said it's okay, you don't have to pay your rent for these 2 months that you were closed, and we get that in writing, of course. So it can be across the board, but at the end of the day, if the landlord decides to bring an unlawful detainer action, which is the action to evict, which can still happen even if you think you have no financial means to pay rent, then your defense would be that Garcetti's order, you have financial problems, coronavirus, and that's why you haven't paid. You can't be charged a penalty for paying late by the landlord. That's what it says. And it can't go on your credit report. So, depending on whether I
But it's
represent.
not, it isn't, oh, you don't have to pay June rent. You don't have to pay May rent. You're saying the order from the mayor of Los Angeles, or the city of Los Angeles, is just, oh, if you can't pay it now, you can pay it later. And if you pay later, there's no fee and it doesn't ding your credit report. That's what you're saying that order says. It doesn't
Right.
like absolve you from paying rent for a month or two.
No, exactly. And again, it's all negotiable. So if you take a tough stance now, maybe when it comes to renew it, your landlord will not want to work with you.
I see.
So there's a lot of things to consider. Every lease, your lease may have provisions. I doubt that it has anything about a force majeure clause, absolving the tenant of having to pay rent. But you would.
And wait a minute. Say that legal term again for
Yeah.
like the world is ending viral pandemic. What was that? Forced measure clause? Is that what you said?
Yes, the force majeure clause. It
The
excuses
the
performance
force
measure. I think it's
majeure.
French.
Yeah,
Measure,
force
yes. I hope I'm
majeure.
pronouncing that right.
So what is it? Force majeure. What does it mean?
It is basically a clause in a contract that excuses performance. That means that there's a major event like a strike or an act of God,
Right.
and because of that, you cannot perform, and then you would have to show why you could not perform.
I
And
don't have to pay rent because an act of God, or I don't have to work, or it just gets you out of it because of an act of God.
that's not likely in your lease, but it could be in in one of your contracts to provide services. So it's in my clients' service contracts contain it. That's for sure. And in most of my contracts are meant to be fair. So
Yeah.
it can excuse both parties. By having a fair contract from the beginning, you reduce the negotiation of back and forth legal time. So, it depends on every client's situation.
How has your contracts, like moving forward, are you going to include that in your future contracts? How have your contracts, changed because of this?
Yeah, I've had a lot of clients who have a lot of contracts that need to be revised, and we're working within their legal budget. So it's not just contracts, but it's like the policies, all new policies going forward. The standard force majeure clause kind of contains like a catch-all where they can maybe, probably include an emergency order pandemic. But then even if the other party were to say no, it doesn't include that. You would still have other contract defenses, such as frustration of purpose. The purpose of this contract is frustrated by what's going on. You have the defense of impossibility of performance. So, or the claim of it. So you would basically say it's impossible for me to perform because we're in a shutdown. We're at a safer at home order. I can't provide this service.
Yeah.
Even illegality is another potential claim. So there's all sorts of, contract claims and defenses that you would include if you're trying to get in or out of a contract.
Suzanne, do you find that most people, meaning on both sides of this negotiation, are like reasonable, good people who try to work things out?
um, well,
Tell me about that laugh.
I can't help but laugh because sometimes a lot of times you have at least four factors on whether or not people are reasonable, because you have me, the lawyer on one side, my client, and then you have the lawyer on the other side who could be crazy, and then you have the client on the other side who could also be crazy, or one of the two.
Wow.
So I would say most of my clients are not, of course, but I just laugh because you know, you have to make fun of you have to laughing is a good thing to get out of your job, and when you're handling, you know, real big, you know, serious issues, because I'm telling you, usually when it's somebody crazy, sadly, it's really hard for your client, or, you know, for the case to basically settle or the deal to go through. But mostly they are reasonable.
Kind of sounds that way. It
Yeah.
made me feel a little better, but certainly
Yeah.
uh, people like to use the legal system to aggressively get what they want, whether it's reasonable or not.